I know it's crazy, but it's
You're watching Channel Z, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel. Broadcasting live from Studio Z.
Makes me act the way I do.
Hello, I'm Liz Rumbach. Welcome to Brain Dead Theater. This is where we examine zombie media, television, and movies to explore what we can learn from fictional zombies in our current apocalyptic moment. My co-host, Ilana Rain, today isn't able to make it, but I am joined by Athena Octopus. Athena, how are you?
Hey, I am so excited to be here and to talk about this movie.
Oh my gosh,
I love this movie.
Yes, it's one of my favorite movies. I can't wait. So today we'll be discussing trust, betrayal, and female friendship by watching a few clips from the 2004 movie Mean Girls. While Mean Girls is based somewhat slightly on a book, I think it's important to note, or maybe just important for me to note, that the screenplay was written by Tina Fey. In the movie, Lindsay Lohan's parents, Katie, the character's parents, are primatologists, anthropologists, and today we're joined by two experts on that. The first, hi, Jaimie, how are you?
Hi, nice to meet you guys. Great to be here.
It's so good to have you. So Jaimie Krems is joining us today. She is a doctor of experimental psychology. I wonder if you'd tell us just a little bit about your work?
Yes, happy to. So I am a social psychologist, and I use a lot of interdisciplinary tools in my work, integrating evolutionary biology and animal behavior. Most of that work focuses on how females strategically and agentically navigate their same-sex social relationships. So cooperation and competition among women.
So you study like friends and frenemies, essentially?
Friends, frenemies, and outright enemies, when we can call them that, but it's very rare.
Nice.
Oh, this is the perfect movie. I cannot wait. We're also joined by Dr. Nicole Hess, Doctor of Anthropology. Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
It's so good to have you. I wonder if you'd say a few words about your work.
Okay, yeah, I'm a biological anthropologist, and I study female competition and female cooperation that's used in this competition. And I've done some ethnographic fieldwork in college sororities, as well as spending a little time in Central African Republic, working with hunter-gatherers there to see if there are any parallels. And in addition to that, I do a little bit on non-human primate behavior, cooperation and competition in females.
So, Nicole, I have to ask, what was more intense, being in the field in Africa or being in the sorority?
The sorority, by far. The sorority women were at an age, they were at a phase in life where there was heavy competition for mates. So they're all in that kind of college age range. And so the competition was very apparent, and people were very forthright about it. And it was a lot easier to observe than what I saw in hunter-gatherers in Africa.
I think that's the perfect transition into one of the clips that we have today. So I'll just really quickly say the first clip we have from Mean Girls is the Halloween scene. So I cannot wait to go ahead and the
zombie scene.
Started. It's the zombie scene. Of course,
yes.
We're starting with the zombie scene in Mean Girls. Yeah. All right.
Hey.
Oh, no. Didn't anybody tell you? You were supposed to wear a costume.
Shut up. I need to talk to you. You know that girl, Katie?
Yeah, she's cool. I invited her tonight.
Well, be careful, because she has a huge crush on you.
Really? How do you know?
Because she told me. She tells everybody. It's kind of cute, actually. She's like a little girl. She writes all over her notebook, Mrs. Erin Samuels. And she made this t-shirt that says, I heart Erin, and she wears it under all her clothes.
Oh, come on.
Well, who can blame her? I mean, you're gorgeous. And okay, look, I'm not saying she's a stalker, but she saved this Kleenex you used, and she said she's gonna do some kind of African voodoo with it to make you like her.
What?
This was it. Regina said she would talk to Erin for me, and now she was.
I know she's kind of socially retarded and weird, but she's my friend, so just promise me you won't make fun of her.
Of course I'm not going to make fun of her.
How could Janice hate Regina? She was such a good Slut!
I wonder if we can just start by appreciating Rachel McAdams in that scene. She is killing it.
Yeah. And I mean, I love the like contrast of the two Halloween costumes, like the bunny and then the zombie bride. You could not have chosen like two more diametrically opposite costumes when it comes to the sex appeal, right?
Yeah, I know. I think like one of the, go ahead. Oh, sorry. I think one of the things that's really important about this scene too is how information is being manipulated, right? How trust is being betrayed. And I wonder if Jaimie and Nicole, if y'all have any observations about that. Yeah, and Erica, right? Thank you, Erica, for bringing this up. Betrayal. That's exactly right.
So I just have to say, in this clip, I think it's a beautiful illustration of how powerful Regina is. And the power that she gets comes from everyone giving her information and trusting her to do the talking to somebody else for them. And so we don't typically talk about female power in this way, but man, those people who are central in their network that a lot of other people know who have access to information like that, that's pretty powerful, whether or not you have bunny ears.
Yeah, and I think kind of throughout the movie, there's a lot of examples of where female friends have disclosed to Regina, and then she kind of stores that information and breaks it out when she needs to enhance her own reputation and derogate the reputations of other people very strategically.
Like a very bitchy Shrike.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's we do have a comment from Erica as well. Animal behavior. It reminds her of the intro scene of Lindsay Lohan coming into a new school. And I think I mentioned up at the top that her parents are primatologists, anthropologists, right? And what she does throughout the movie is kind of categorize cliques. Is that anything like maybe some of the field work that y'all do?
Yeah, so non-human primates definitely engage in a lot of cooperative competition. They're more inclined to engage in, of course, physical competition instead of using words to manipulate reputations. But it's very widespread throughout the primates and outside of the primates into other social mammals. Individuals cooperate to compete with other members of their groups to raise their status in the dominance hierarchy and lower that of their competitors.
So this is like a great example of indirect aggression, right? Where there's, you can't actually necessarily see the derogation or the, damage that's happening, right? Because it's happening in this way that's kind of like behind the scenes. And I mean, I guess Kate Lowen's character sees that something's going on that shouldn't, right? When that kiss happens. But until then, it's, she can't even tell that Regina is undermining her.
And she only can tell because she's seeing it right there and in person, but in so much of the movie and in other clips and in real life, so we often don't know that somebody has talked shit, so to speak, about us behind our backs. Mm-hmm. When we do know, we might not know who spread the negative information. And then when we can find the person, so we know somebody said it, we finally find the person and they say, oh, I was just passing on what someone else said, or, oh, I didn't mean it like that. So there are all of these ways and junctures at which women, especially, who overwhelmingly use indirect aggression when competing against same-sex others, all these junctures at which women can sort of mitigate the potential cost that they're going to get from competing. It's kind of beautiful. Awful, awful, absolutely awful. I study this because women have been evil to me, but also beautiful. Just checking on you, Emily Karp and Mia Vergari. Don't be friends with those women. They're awful.
Oh, I love the call outs. I mean, honestly, I think maybe we're all here because this has happened to us, right? I think one of the things that's so great about this movie is that Tina Fey wrote a movie we can identify with. I do have a question here before we move on to our next clip that I think it would be great to address. So I know Mean Girls is set in a high school, but that party scene could have been straight out of a sorority situation, or honestly, just any college party that maybe we have experienced. How does this cliquey female friendship carry over into college?
This is what I studied in sororities, in college sororities. So these are women aged, on the super young side, 17 to maybe 22 on the older side. And so they're young women who have lived with their family at home their whole lives. And then all of a sudden they move into a city, usually fairly far away, a few hundred miles. And they're in this sea of potential competitors, friends, mates, etc. And one way that women told me, who I interviewed, wanted to kind of more safely, they thought at least, navigate that world is by joining a sorority, where you get a much more formal social setting, where you have very clear parties that are set up for you to go to. It's also a closed social scene, so you're not usually hanging out with random people. You're a member of a kind of tight community. And from that community, you draw your best friends, your enemies are in there from other sorority houses. You've got some enemies probably within your sorority. And then you've got the pool of potential male mates out there in the fraternity world. And so this competition, if you're in a Greek community, I would say it just gets even more intense after you leave high school and go into college, because the pool is bigger, the stakes are higher, and there's a lot of formality in terms of ruling bodies, college administrators, et cetera, who can enforce various rules and the like.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And then I think before we move on, I have a question here from Pamela, and then I think maybe Jaimie, we might want to get your response to Nicole and then maybe to this question as well. So what would the movie Mean Boys look like, and how would it differ from this? They might address this a little bit in Mean Girls, the movie, if y'all want to watch the rest of it. Anyone watching hasn't seen it. But Jaimie, Nicole, I wonder if y'all have any thoughts?
I mean, it would be a short and much less intense movie. It would look like The Expendables, but where Dolph Lundgren hangs a pirate and then the pirate is fine and then they go have a beer afterward. Males are much more tolerant of genetically unrelated same-sex others. So males and other males get along, they don't get along, and then they get along again. For females, our relationships are really deep and intense, but much shorter lived. And they are marked by a lot of other paradoxes that Athena and I have been talking about for quite some time. So these relationships are enforced as purely egalitarian, but they're also secretly competitive. They are beautiful paradigms of platonic friendship, and yet other people also think that women can't actually be friends with each other. So if there's a Mean Boys, that's a really quick movie. Somebody punches somebody else and then they hang out.
I love this. Yeah, that's exactly what Ely is saying, right? More fists and toxic masculinity and Mean Boys, for sure.
I have a question for you guys, because right now we're at a time where there is definitely a challenging of a lot of gender norms about everything, right? And people are kind of on the spectrum of identities, from sort of accepting oh, I'm very gendered, to non-binary, and everything in between. So how does this conflict, or these styles of conflict, does that relate to gender identity, or how does it change? If you're someone who's non-binary, are you less likely to have a gender specific aggression strategy, or do we know anything about the research on that?
I don't know any of the research on that, but that's a really good question. That would be really interesting to start looking at, maybe in the gay community. Do we see any patterns that emerge? I don't know what the answer would be.
I'm starting to hear, whenever I'm talking, especially about mating behavior, the question is always, okay, great, but how would this look amongst non-heterosexuals? And so Dan Conroy Beam is doing some of that work. Keela Williams is doing some of that work to really fill in some of our basic understanding, which will hopefully parse gender identity, sexual orientation, and some other features in understanding this. But another way you could answer it is what's the mechanism? So if it's culture and prescribed norms, maybe that suggests one avenue. If it's biological differences related to hormones, that might suggest another. So there are lots of ways to play with it. But yeah, I don't think we know yet.
So I'm watching this show with my daughter who's 15 and my kids who are younger than that, called Owl House, where like the main character is it's animated. It's this like female witch or witch wannabe who's pretty non-binary, and she has a conflict with another girl in this series, and like the storyline is basically like they have a fight and then they hang out. So I kind of wonder, at least in terms of how, this aggression is getting portrayed in fiction, it's sort of like, showing this, less, female typical, setting in terms of the way the conflict is playing out.
And I will say, so there are some queer LGBTQIA plus plot lines in Mean Girls, right? So the character of Damien is gay, out, proud, and actually at the end of the movie wants to come into the gymnasium scene where it's all of the junior girls gathering, because he feels like he's part of that community more than he's part of any other community. So I think it's also about like where your friendship lies. And then there's also the plot where Regina, one of the things that she's done to her old friend Janice is ruin Janice's reputation by outing her as a lesbian, right? So there are some ways in which these queer plot lines are intersecting with the kind of female aggression that we're seeing throughout the rest of the movie too. And if y'all have any thoughts on that, I think that's one of the coolest things about the movie for me, actually.
It reminds me of I had election anxiety and I did something stupid and I bought the movie The Craft, the remake or reimagining. Yes. Which is an extremely woke version of the old fantastic movie about female groups. And in that movie, some people gave it a really awful rating because these women are competing with each other. And they didn't think that women should compete with each other. So it just makes me think of how we sort of prescribe, or we look with our lens and our norms onto these things. So if we don't want women to be competitive with each other, we kind of look at that and say it's catty and bad. But we also have to acknowledge the reality is that sometimes, yes, of course, women are competitive with each other. And that's important. We have to really actually study it and appreciate it.
Jaimie, that kind of raises the question of like, is the aggression indirect because the direct aggression is looked down on, or is there something more fundamental going on?
Mm-hmm. Well, there is some direct aggression. And I know, Nicole, you've probably seen more of that in the field sites and perhaps the sororities.
So direct, you mean physical aggression? So I didn't see that in sororities. I don't think I saw that in the field either.
But there is this time, right, where indirect aggression, or verbal, behind the scenes aggression can start transitioning to direct aggression, right? And the physical aggression.
Yeah, and there are a lot of examples of that in the movie when there's that scene in the hallway. I don't know if we might see that clip, but somebody has harmed somebody's reputation and it escalates into a physical fight. And in humans, it's actually pretty rare for women or girls to engage in physical fights, especially if you compare them to men and boys. And a researcher looked at this, an anthropologist named Victoria Burbank, a couple decades ago, cross-culturally, and she found that physical fights among women were rare, and when they did occur, it was usually over an insult to one's reputation. So if they said something that impacted their reputation, that would then escalate into a physical fight. And then the other category where physical fights would happen would be in contests over men who had a lot of resources or money or belongings.
I think that is a wonderful transition to our next clip, which is that hallway scene. So we'll see you in a minute.
made out with a hot dog. Oh my God, that was one time. Don Schweitzer has a huge ass? Who would write that? Who wouldn't write that?
Trey Pat made out with Coach Carr, and so did Sun Jin Din.
Do you have anything else you want to say?
Oh, no, I can't answer any more questions until I have a parent or lawyer present.
Miss Smith?
Whoever wrote it probably didn't think anyone would ever see it.
I hope that nobody else ever does see it.
I love her at the end, like sitting there, like, or standing there presiding over everything with the steps going down, like she's on a throne.
Yeah. It looks like 28 Days Later, honestly, where they're rage monster zombies. I love it.
I'm really glad we got these two clips back to back, and we'll be discussing these today, right? Because we're starting with this Halloween clip of the zombie that's actually maybe, you know, the one dressed as the zombie maybe isn't displaying zombie behavior. And then we have this where we have a horde, right? We have that same character that is infecting the zombie horde. And then one of the things that I did want to call out maybe really quickly as we go into discussing this is that there are several kind of really serious things that are revealed by the burn book being published basically and circulated by the character of Regina George. And one of them is, you know, a teacher has been accused of selling drugs to students. And then the other, which is not true. And then the other is that teacher-student relationships, a teacher sleeping or making out maybe with underage girls was also revealed, which is true. And so I think that it says a lot about the power and the danger of gossip, right? And I wonder if we could talk a little bit about that, but then we could also kind of ground our discussion in those serious things that are revealed by the burn book.
Yeah, I think like this whole question of, you know, what is like that you can have these things that are revealed, some of which are true and some of which are not true. I mean, that kind of is all about like gossip in general, right? I mean, some of gossip is true, some of it is not true. And then kind of distinguishing what is true from what's not true is part of the challenge, right? With dealing with information. And it kind of is the issue that we're also dealing with right now with our information infrastructure in terms of news, right? So like, I mean, there's that. I don't know if we want to go into all of that, but it just strikes me that this issue of gossip is not just about girls in high school. It's actually about how our society is functioning or not functioning right now.
And it gets a really bad rap. So we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the positives of gossip as well. So we're talking right now about how gossip can expose sensitive information and lead people to become rage monsters in a high school hallway, or perhaps lead people to become less informed voters. But it can also keep people in line and encourage cooperation when gossip is used to punish people who do transgress. So there are some positives to gossip, even if we're focused on the less positive right now.
I've done some studies on that, some still yet to be written up, but where I have participants read a number of negative and positive statements about a target and then indicate how likely they are to give a benefit to the target. And what I found, and I found this in studies in Africa, I found it in sororities, I found it in an online sample, was that the more negative gossip that you hear about someone, the less likely you are to give them the benefit. The more positive gossip you hear, the more likely you are to give them the benefit. So I do think gossip has real consequences. It's not just lies and hearsay, and it can have real world outcomes in terms of whether your reputation is enhanced or decreased, and that impacts whether you get stuff from your group that's valuable.
So not to make this political or anything, but it strikes me that one of the masters of using gossip and indirect aggression and flat out lies to control the shape of the environment around him socially is not female. And so, yeah. So, why and when does this become a strategy that is used by males as opposed to females?
So, I would argue that females are maybe better at it, and they're more likely to be in a situation where they're doing it frequently, but that doesn't preclude males from doing it. And some of the studies that I've done have shown that people use gossip strategically as a weapon when they're in competition. So if you take away that competition, you take away a need to be prepared for it, to look for evidence to support your claims about what's wrong with your opponent. When you remove the competition, your inclination to gossip goes down, negatively goes down. And so if you put men in those competitive circumstances and in this political world, that's what they're doing constantly. I wouldn't not expect them to also use these strategies. And I wonder if we had maybe more female politicians, if we might actually see a lot more of this at an even higher rate. I don't know. We're going to find out.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
I should say too, so you could sort of think about the benefits that males get from competing physically and directly, overtly. So if I beat somebody up, then everyone else knows not to mess with me because I've done it out in the open. And clearly, I think the person that we're talking about, I could beat up with both hands tied behind my back. Not that I would enjoy it or anything. Just saying. So I think that one could talk about the sort of benefits that females don't get from physical aggression. So if I were to beat up another woman, I probably wouldn't get those benefits. The contrast is that you could think about women are, so it's hypothesized that women prefer to use indirect tactics of aggression because they're safer. There's less cost upon retaliation, for example. So if we think about the cost of retaliation and how to defray those, then maybe leaders can use them, especially when they're authoritarian or dictators, because they don't experience any costs. And maybe we should then expect both males and females to use those tactics. I just want to say my parents' neighbors are trash because they're listening to this and they are in tune with this conversation. And my parents are on here, and hi, Mom, and I'm sorry.
So what do you think is like more intimidating, like to deal with? Someone who can beat you up or someone who can destroy your reputation?
I think if they beat me up, I at least recover, I might need a new rib or something, whatever happens there. I've not been beaten up before. But I have been, gossiped about before, and that felt like death. That has lasting repercussions, even for the new friendships that I tried to form. This terror around other women because of self-disclosure that marks our friendships and all of the evil ways they can get to us. It's beautiful and effective and terrifying.
So we have this question that I would love for us to just take before we end about how we can inoculate ourselves against sort of giving into this emotional response of gossip. Like, what can we do so that we are not so zombifiable by individuals who would use these tactics of indirect aggression against us?
And I want to point out too, as we're answering that question, that we've had several here that have been like, how do we use the power of female friendship? How do we not harm but help? And I think that's a very similar question.
That could be a whole nother 8 shows.
Yeah, I think we need a Mean Girls Part 2.
Nicole, do you have thoughts about that?
So I would say, one way to decrease conflicts is to try to figure out ways to not incite competition. Don't have beauty contests, stupid things like that. Don't put women in positions where they're competing with one another for scarce, limited resources. And then the other side of it, I would say, if you are in a position where you're in competition with someone and vulnerable to it, then you need to get your female friends together and get some dirt on your competitor so that you can use it to retaliate if needed. And I think women are pretty good at that. Really good at that.
So we're all going to talk afterward and just get our story straight.
Yeah.
So like, is there like a speak, softly and carry a big wad of dangerous information kind of, like you should just have that in your bag ready to go, but they need to know that you have that ready to go, right? For it to be a big stick.
You can drop subtle hints.
How about you, Jaimie? Do you have advice for us?
Oh man, I think Nicole's advice is the best. Having people that have your back. So there's always a person that I can tell who, no matter what, would take my side in the argument. So having that person and being able to get all of her information and me give her all of my information, that's really comforting. But I think that takes a long time to build that kind of trust.
Yeah, there's some comments here too about, how can we really come together and raise other women up too, right? Like, is there a space for, instead of being sort of pitted against each other, we can, be in the same space and maybe even, be not necessarily be set up to compete against each other, but be okay with, other women achieving things and be able to, not have that trigger this competitive, aggressive kind of, verbally aggressive mindset.
At the end of the movie, they kind of try to do that. They have the intervention after the hallway fights and have everybody kind of self-disclose a little bit and state that they've been victimized. And then they kind of have one solution at the very end. Regina, the big negative character, plays rugby, I think. And they say that she funnels her anger toward this physical competition rather than this gossipy type competition. I don't know if that's effective in the real world. I don't know if they've tried that in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too, as we wrap up, one of the things that's really great about the end of the movie, again, you can tell I'm a Tina Fey fan, but one of the things Tina Fey does in those exercises in the gym is that she creates a space where compassion and empathy and trust can be built. So I think that those exercises that they do together, where they tell truths, right? Where they engage in trust exercises, but trust exercises that build compassion and empathy. I think that might also be a solution as well. So I think, any final thoughts before we wrap up today? I think definitely Mean Girls Part 2. Do we need to discuss that gym scene?
Yes, that would be lovely.
There's a second movie, I think.
Oh, okay. There we go. All right. We've got Part 2. Well, I want to say thank you so much to my co-host for today, Athena. Thank you, Nicole and Jaimie, for being here. This has been lovely. Let's talk more about Mean Girls and/or Tina Fey. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for Brain Dead Theater. Thanks for being here. Thanks for bringing your popcorn and your brains. And we'll see you at or in the movies.
It's crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something supernatural with you.